Welcome, everyone, to another broadcast of the Judge Hubert Radio Hour on the ArtistFirst Radio Network. All past broadcasts are podcasts. Find them at artistfirst.com. And now your host, judge and author, the Honorable Judge Hubert.
Thank you, Scott. It's a pleasure to be with you as always, and to all of our friends and family and listening audience from throughout Radio Land and the World Wide Web. We want to say good afternoon. It's certainly a pleasure, as always, to come and be with you. I want you to also call a friend and have them to listen in tonight. You know, again, I always say that our show is still relatively new, and therefore you got to go online to listen in to any of our former shows that were produced over the past year or so, and hear those interviews on many of the contemporary issues that we're dealing with today. There's still attacks on a variety of different areas here in the state of Florida. Unfortunately, we've got a governor who likes to, doesn't take too kindly to those people who disagree with him. And so he's attacked every group from critical race theory and made it into a boogeyman, which it was not. He's attacked the LGBTQ community, even Disney folks. And, as a result of that, there's all types of litigation that's going on. And, of course, one of his seems to be favorite targets has been the black folks here in the state of Florida, with many of the issues that he has seemingly addressed. It's also had groups such as the Moms for Liberty that have stirred up book bans, trying to basically limit what people can be educated about in their schools. And as a result of that, it's also caused a lot of other spin-off issues. He has what he calls an anti-woke message. And part of that anti-wokeness is that he says in one of his bylines is that Florida is a place where wokeness comes to die. Well, I've always asked the question, what's the opposite of woke? Sleep. And what happens then when you're asleep? You're resting good and you're getting renewed and refreshed, or on the other hand, you're not conscious of what's going on around you. And certainly what we try to do with our show here is to educate our listening audience and to address many of today's social, educational, and justice issues. In the words of one of my mentors, you all have heard me say it before, education is the key to being and staying free. And in the words of my good friend and mentor, Dr. Matt King Carter, never go to bed as ignorant as you were when you woke up this morning. Every day, you ought to learn something new. That means we ought to all be lifelong learners, in the words of academia. And yet, there's so many people that seem to be content with filling their minds with whatever they see on television, whatever they see in video games, whatever they see on social media, without being conscious of whether or not they're learning something new. Well, tonight, we certainly are going to learn some new things. I've got a great guest here tonight who is certainly one of those rising stars who knows and sees and witnesses a lot of the changes taking place here in the state of Florida. And yet, he's one of what I would call an upcoming mover and shaker. And I'm so happy that he's able to take some time out and to be with us tonight. We are going to be talking, as you always know, I tend to follow a path of dealing with issues of law, education, and social justice. And I'm happy to say that our guest tonight actually kind of combines all three of those things together. He's a young man who's accomplished a lot during his few years here on planet Earth. Graduate of Florida A&M University. I know that many out there say go Rattlers. Go at least until the Florida Classic. We have no problem. Y'all beat everybody up. But at Florida Classic time, y'all take your foot off the pedal and give Bethune-Cookman a chance to come back to life again. But he is indeed what one would call a political strategist, community organizer. He's been doing this for well over a decade. He's currently serves in multiple capacities, but he's the political director for Equal Ground Action Fund. And, of course, that means he's deeply involved with legislative action, as evidenced by some of the recent victories that they've had and his organization has had here in the state of Florida. Prior to working with Equal Ground, He was a legislative assistant at the congressional level, serving in both the 113th and 114th Congress. And then thereafter working in where I got to know him even more so in the Florida legislature. He certainly was one of those unsung heroes that worked tirelessly behind the scenes and assisted in the successful passage of legislation that made Dr. McLeod Bethune one of the Florida representatives in National Statuary Hall. She certainly is the first and only Black woman to represent a state. And she did that with the unanimous vote from our state Senate, and then with only one dissent and 111 votes in favor on the House side. And it went on so that last year, about this time, she was the statute was formally unveiled there in D.C. in Statuary Hall. And so Genesis is one of those unsung heroes that was working behind the scenes to help make all of that possible. So I want to welcome to the show tonight none other than Mr. Genesis Robinson. I like to call him by his first name, since the word Genesis means beginning. The book of beginnings, of course, in the Bible is based on Genesis. I've got a feeling his mom might have picked that name out from the scriptures just to make sure that everybody could know that he was top-notch from the very beginning of his journey on earth, and that we can always know that he's first in line, and we know that he's top. So welcome to the show, Mr. Genesis Robinson.
Yes, sir, Judge. Thank you for having me. I'm delighted to be on with you tonight. And hello to all of your listeners. Looking forward to a great conversation talking about the political landscape here in the state of Florida. So I'm excited to join you.
You know, sometimes when we think about the landscape in Florida, it almost makes you want to breathe a sigh. But I can say a sigh of relief from this past weekend when we had a successful overturning of Governor DeSantis's gerrymandered congressional district in North Florida, which eliminated a seat that had been held for a number of years by none other than Congressman Al Lawson. And that, of course, I'd like to certainly get your take on it. In fact, tell us a little bit about it. How did that even come about? And then ultimately, the judge ruled that it, in fact, was unconstitutional, both at the state level and at the federal level. So talk a little bit about that and tell us more about it.
Yes, sir. So our organization, Equal Ground, was one of the plaintiffs in a challenge to Florida's congressional redistricting plan. For those of you who are listening, every 10 years, states are required to use the census data to redraw legislative boundaries. And so we do that both at the local, state, and federal level. And so after the state of Florida got the data, it was determined that we would actually gain a congressional seat. And so we went from 27 seats to 28. And when the legislature started to do their work to redraw these boundaries, they intended to preserve the representation that we had in terms of the Black community here in the state of Florida. Prior to the redrawing of the map, there were 4 of Florida's 27 representatives who were Black. We had the late Congressman Alcee Hastings down in South Florida. You had Congresswoman Frederica Wilson, Congresswoman Val Demings out of Orlando, and then Congressman Al Lawson out of Jacksonville to Tallahassee. And so the legislature was supposed to draw these maps, and they were doing their work just fine. They had submitted some proposed maps that would preserve all of those seats. And then, about midway through the process, the governor took a very uncharacteristic and unprecedented step in submitting his own map. Now, the legislature invites public input, but it's very unusual for the governor, the person who has to sign off on the plan, to really give his input ahead of it getting to his desk. And so the governor put out a plan, and in his plan, he had proposed eliminating pretty much 2 of the congressional districts that were guaranteed to elect a Black representative. And so, there was a lot of concern as to whether or not the legislature would adhere to what the governor was asking, but they stuck to their guns and they defied the governor, and they still passed a plan that preserved black representation. And so this is where things took a turn. Because of that, when it got to his desk, the governor decided to veto the bill. That is a power that's extended to him through the Florida Constitution, and he took that power to veto the bill, and then he called the legislature back for what's known as a special session. So that's a time outside of their regularly scheduled time to meet, where he forced them to come back and take up a new map, because they had to constitutionally do so. And it was at that time that the legislature capitulated to the governor. They gave him exactly what it is that he wanted, and as a result, Congressional District 10, which was represented by Congresswoman Val Demings, and Congressional District 5, which was represented by Congressman Al Lawson, was drawn in such a way that there was no guarantee that black voters would be able to elect the candidate of their choice. And because of that, partisan as well as diminishment of African-American voters' ability to elect a candidate of their choice, our organization, along with a few other plaintiffs, sued the state of Florida because we felt that the state had violated what's known as the Fair District Amendments, which were passed in 2010. And the Fair District Amendments are very simple and straightforward. And they say when you're doing the redistricting process, you can't draw political boundaries that attempt to favor one political party or give an advantage based on partisan or racial advantages. Notwithstanding, you still have to be in compliance with the Voting Rights Act at the federal level. And so we felt that, the governor and the legislature had violated the Constitution, and so we sued. And it's been a long road, but just here recently, the court agreed, and, they sided in favor, and they have ordered the state of Florida to redraw a new map ahead of the 2024 election cycle. So I know that was a little long-winded, but I just want to try to set the stage of what it is that we're dealing with and sort of how we got here. And so we're currently awaiting to see what that next step looks like. We do anticipate the possibility of an appeal, but if things hold out, which we hope that they will, the state of Florida will be going into session here starting in January, and one of the things on their to-do list will be to draw a new map for Florida's congressional districts.
It's certainly your response was not too long. It was the kind of detail that our listeners have become accustomed to. They want to know the facts. They want to know the background, and you've done a great job in sharing that. What's interesting now is Alabama, and of course we know this governor is probably going to appeal because he doesn't ever think that he's wrong about anything. And and let me go back to just a moment. And we noticed that during the budget session that he vetoed certain specific, and he has a line item veto, which the President of the United States does not have, but that's provided for in the Constitution. But he was able to veto certain spending proposals that had been passed by the legislature for, I know, at least two or more of those legislators who, quote unquote, did not support his effort to become president. They had gone out and they had endorsed former President Trump. And these two gentlemen, as I remember down in Sarasota, what would normally considered to be mundane bills, he struck their funding out of the budget.
That's right.
And that's the kind of retaliation that he does. So I'm pretty sure you and your organization anticipate that he's going to probably try to appeal this judge's ruling.
Yes, that is so right. That is definitely what we anticipate. And I'm happy that you brought up that point about what he did concerning the vetoes, right? Because the governor in the state has two special authorities. So he can veto an entire bill or when it comes to the budget, he has the power of what's called a line item veto. And so he can go in and take out, specific projects, specific budget amounts that he may disagree with. And, and in fact, when he vetoed the redistricting plan initially, he refused to sign the budget until they completed the new map, right? So just imagine the type of pressure that legislators who dared to defy his initial request when he submitted his own map and sort of signaled to them what he wanted them to do. Imagine the type of political pressure that you would be under to defy someone like Ron DeSantis, who is incredibly powerful in this state. And they still went ahead and did that. And then even after doing it, he said, okay, I'm going to wait before I sign this budget to see if you all give me what it is that I want. And so knowing that he had that type of power over projects that were important to their district, many of them did not have political courage to withstand that, and they capitulated, unfortunately. And so, it's just unfortunate that is how one of the largest states, the third largest state in the nation, is operating and governing out of fear and not sound policy and good ideas for everyday Floridians.
But yet this man wants to be president of the United States. He wants to obtain the nomination for the Republican Party. And these are the kind of things that I believe as he moves outside of the state of Florida, they think as a byline of that, I would point out the fact that this legislature adopted a position, changed the law to allow for him to remain in office as governor while he's running for president. And that's never been done before. Normally there's a resign to run. If you're going to run for another state or federal office and you're currently holding one, you're required to resign. But because they were, I guess, again, he bullied them into passing the legislation that allows them to do both things at the same time. Totally unprecedented.
Totally unprecedented. And to take it a step further, Judge, one of the things that was so incredibly, disappointing about how that played out is they slipped this bill in the middle of session, right? So every year, members have an opportunity pretty much at the end of one legislative session going into another, they have an opportunity to start filing bills. And so they didn't file this bill early on. This wasn't something that the public had an opportunity to hear about and weigh in on. They pretty much slipped this in the heat of night. I vividly remember when it dropped. I was having dinner with a state senator out of Miami, and we were just sitting there having dinner, and he got an email basically saying that the committee that he sits on was going to be taking up a new bill in the morning, literally in the morning, the very next day. And he hadn't had a chance to read it, hear about it, discuss it with his colleagues or anything, but yet he was going to be expected to vote and give an up or down in committee the next day. And that's sure enough what happened. The very next day, he went to the committee and they introduced what's called a proposed committee bill, because committees have the power to bring forth any legislation at any time. They don't have to go through the traditional process that a member does. And so, they brought forth the elections. Check this out. Check out this name. The Elections and Integrity Committee is what brought forth this bill, right? And so in this bill, they were not even trying to hide the fact that they were doing something to benefit the governor solely. The resign to run law applies to every elected official in the state of Florida. And instead of changing it for every elected official in the state of Florida, they specifically changed it for anyone that was running for vice president or president. And at the time, there was only one person in the state of Florida who everyone knew was going to run for that office. So it's a shame, that they're working in tandem with the governor to do all of this harm and this destruction, when people are just simply saying, hey, all we want you to do is follow the law. We're not asking you to do anything extraordinary. We're not asking you to do anything, that is unethical or that would violate your oath to the Constitution. We're just simply saying follow the law. That's it. And they're having a hard time doing that.
That's amazing. And, we could talk about so many other areas that are related. I mean, they were often referred to the work that he's doing as being culture wars. He, for example, he literally declared war on school boards throughout the state and began to endorse certain candidates who were running for school board in the past election, but with the understanding that they would, if they didn't support what he wanted, then he would come out against them. You were sharing with me earlier, just before we started up, that one of his recent attacks has been on the state attorney for the 9th Judicial Circuit, which is commonly referred to as Orlando, Orange County, and Osceola County. And when a few weeks ago, he suspended State Attorney Monique Worrell, a 66%, who received 66% of the vote to be elected to that position in the 2020 election. And yet he removed her from office on some quote unquote trumped up charges, saying that she was not carrying out the duties and responsibilities of her office. She, of course, is, like I said, she received 66% of the vote. He wanted to blame her for certain crimes that were committed there in the Orlando area, but this was the second, in fact, Democratic state attorney that he has removed from office since he's been there. And I can tell you that over a period of time, there's never been a governor before who has done that. The only time they've removed people from office has been if they committed what's referred to as high crimes and misdemeanors. And they could not cite a misdemeanor or even a crime that she has committed. But he was using his platform, and again, a bully pulpit, to be able to remove people that did not line up with his philosophy. And he did it not only the 2 times with 2 state attorneys, as I understand, he did it something like 3 other times for other positions in the state. And again, all of these people that were removed were people of the opposite party from him.
That's right.
What's your thoughts?
The situation with the duly elected state attorney, Monique Worrell, is really a travesty to democracy. Equal Ground was founded as a voting rights organization to protect democracy in the state of Florida. And I tell you, with this governor, we've been busier than ever. Like you said, the voters of Orange and Osceola County elected this woman with over 66% of the vote. And they knew exactly who she was. They knew exactly what type of leader she would be, what type of public official she would be. And they supported her vision of trying to reimagine what it looks like to have criminal justice played out. And so because she had diversion programs, because she believed in giving people a second chance, because she was unable to bring certain cases, in his opinion, to justice, the governor thought that was enough to, abuse his power and remove her from office. And, it's just a shame that he did that. Today it was announced that she has opted to ask the Florida Supreme Court to reinstate her. And so we're going to see where that, situation goes. Obviously, we know the makeup of Florida Supreme Court. Florida has, really been under the control of one particular political party for the better part of the last 30 years. And so, we're going to see where it goes. I do have some faith in our system for our judges to do the right thing. Going back to the redistricting case real quick, 2 out of the 3 judges who reversed the redistricting were Republican judges. 2 of them were appointed by President Donald Trump. And so, we have faith in the judicial system for it to work the way that it's intended to work. And that's something that we're going to continue to use, and just fight, because at the end of the day, leaders, or I don't want to say leaders, but people like Ron DeSantis have shown you that you literally have to stop them before they do the right thing. You brought up the Alabama redistricting case. This is a case where the lower courts were very clear in what they were instructing the legislature to do when they asked them to redraw the maps. They defied it. They took it all the way up to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court still said, "Hey, you have to redraw these maps." And what did they do? They still didn't do what the Supreme Court asked them to do. The Supreme Court was very clear in what they told Alabama to do. And so I'm only saying that to say that a lot of times you have to stick this fight to these folks and take it all the way and fight with everything that you have, because, as the old saying goes, power sees nothing, without a demand. And so we have to stay vigilant. We have to continue to fight, because, these folks are not going to give up any form of power. They see the tides are changing. They see the demographics in this country are changing. And so anything they can do to hold on to power and to, maintain that control, they will continue to do that. And then one more thing I'll say, just going back to the redistricting real quick, the fight for fair maps and democracy, particularly in the state of Florida, has always been determined by the courts, right? Judge, you're a history guy, and you know that prior to 1992, when Congresswoman Corrine Brown, the late Congresswoman Carrie Meek, and the late Alcee Hastings went to Congress, there had not been a black representative from Florida for over 100 years, right? And so it was because of that lawsuit that they filed against the state that said, no, Florida has enough black folks in this state that you ought to have considerable black representation. And if it wasn't for that lawsuit, if it wasn't for the agreement for them to create those 3 seats, we would potentially still be in a situation to where, we're asking and fighting for us to have our fair representation in Congress. And so for this governor to try to go back on that commitment, the black community in Florida has not decreased. It has not shrunk. And so for him to try to take us from the 4 seats that we currently had going into redistricting to the 2 seats that are guaranteed to elect a black representative is just absolutely wrong. And so, I just say that to say, this fight will continue. It will go on, but it must be done through the courts. We can't be afraid to use the courts as a means to bring about positive change.
And even as a follow-up on that Alabama case, as I understand, even in the last couple of days, that the U.S. district courts there in Alabama have ruled again. And in fact, they took it out of the hands of the legislature because there were legislators that basically were balking at the instructions that had been given by the U.S. Supreme Court. So the plaintiffs took it back to the trial judge, and the trial judge made a ruling to agreeing with the plaintiffs, requiring now that a special master be appointed to do what needed to be done to do as we say, to do the right thing. And so you've got the courts are once again in Alabama, and probably going to follow a similar pattern here in Florida, where a special master actually has to draw those maps up and present it back to the court there to make sure that they comply with what the Supreme Court is. Now, there was some news brief that said that the reason why Alabama did not comply was that they had gotten some quote unquote reading that if they took this case back to the U.S. Supreme Court, that Justice Kavanaugh was prepared to change his position. So, the hanky-panky of this whole thing, the lack of which is causing the lack of respect to expand for our U.S. Supreme Court. But even in spite of that, they did the right thing in the Alabama case. And I know that DeSantis and his crew will probably appeal this whole ruling here from the state court judge. They'll take it up to the Florida Supreme Court and maybe even move it over to the federal side after we get to that point. But supposedly, as I understand the law, the state Supreme Court is supposedly is to be the final arbiter of state law. In other words, if there's a state statute that they're relying upon. Then the rulings of the Florida Supreme Court are supposed to take precedent over any federal district ruling, except that the U.S. Supreme Court, to better explain it, the U.S. Supreme Court will give great deference or great respect or great weight to a ruling by the Florida Supreme Court interpreting Florida law. And so, unfortunately, we're going to probably see this one play out. I doubt if this governor is going to back down, because it's not in his nature to back down. I mean, even with the recent hurricane that came through here just last week, he was supposed, the president came down. President Biden came down, I believe it was might have been last Friday or Saturday. And do you know that the governor, quote unquote, did not choose to honor the president by meeting with the president, even though the whole purpose of his coming was to get a bird's eye view of the damage that came about because of the hurricane. And this governor chose not to even come out. He made some lame excuse as to why that the focus should be on the people and not upon him as a politician. But that was just, at any other time, the highest ranking officers within the state typically will meet with the president, and they put politics aside when you've got this kind of tragedy, but he chose not to. Now, I can say this, and it probably has to do with the Israel election coming up, but Senator Scott was the one that ended up coming down and, accompanying the president as they moved about up there in the Live Oak, Perry area, which was hardest hit by this hurricane. So, it's unfortunate that we've got somebody who's putting his own politics over everything else. And, if he probably heard our radio show, he'd probably be upset with us. But, we both are independent, so it don't matter.
Yes. And it's really a shame. I don't want to, belabor the point too much, but, any other time when you have an opportunity to meet with the president, a person who can control billions of dollars coming to your state for recovery, you don't play politics with that, right? And it's just a shame that he's listening to his campaign folks telling him that it wasn't a good look from an optics standpoint to be seen with the president. People in his state are hurting. People have died. People have lost their belongings, their homes, their life savings in many instances. And for the governor to put himself above the needs of Floridians who are counting on him to do the right thing and advocate on their behalf is just shameful. But, again, as a political strategist, I get it. I understand it. I, see this political process play out on a daily basis. And it's my belief that he's just making the calculation that, President Biden is unable to sort of play the same game that he's playing, right? That President Biden will have to follow through, that he can't somehow snub Florida because DeSantis didn't go meet with him. And so, I get it, I understand it, but I just know in my heart of hearts that it is wrong because, these people want to know when they go to bed at night, wherever they're able to live, and as they try to piece their lives together, that their governor is doing all he can to advocate for them. And by refusing a meeting with the President of the United States, trying to survey damage, does not send a positive sign to those people.
Yeah, it's sad that it comes off that way. But again, this is the governor that we have, the citizens of Florida have elected twice. The hope is that, of course, excuse me, they have, of course, we recognize he's term limited in terms of running beyond this time, but his numbers in the polls continue to drop. And at the same time that former President Trump's numbers in the polls among potential Republican voters is far and above, I don't even know what that latest number is, but it's way beyond what the governor has acquired here. So unfortunately, you got both people in Florida that are battling it out to lead the Republican Party, and only God knows what's going to happen with that.
Yes, and on the poll numbers, real quick, it's really interesting to see what's happening. I mean, Judge, you've been around, you've been following the political scene for a while. I think in 50 to 100 years, we're going to be able to look back and sort of study what we're seeing as we witness such a flawed, right? I'm not talking politics, and however you feel on the political spectrum, but there's no doubt that Donald Trump, from a traditional standpoint of being a flawed candidate with having baggage and debt and lawsuits and legal trouble, that is a person that you would not expect to be leading the party and the country, right? And so for Ron DeSantis to be losing very badly in a lot of polls to a person who has all this baggage says a lot about both of them. And it's quite interesting. A lot of folks are sort of taking bets, if you will, if he will make it through the year in the race. His super PAC has pulled out of a lot of early states that they were invested in. They had canvass operations and field operations in some of these states, and they're pulling out. And so that's an early signal when you start to pull out of states where you haven't even had the primary or the caucus, that you're not feeling too good about your chances. And so that was, just something that I took note of this week when I saw that report they had pulled out of some of those early states.
Wow. Well, speaking of pulling out of early states, and we this coming up year, the Republicans just had their first conference or debate a couple of weeks ago, and now we're moving deeply into the election season with all of the changes that this governor and legislature have made to voting. It's amazing because we look back in 2020, right after the votes were counted, DeSantis stated that this was was the most secure election that we had in the state of Florida. And then they began passing more restrictive voting laws, changing things that could be done that were normal, accepted things for the process. And yet we know that the emerging groups of young people are beginning to get more politically involved. And what they will be, of course, the voters of not just the future, but the voters of now. So share with our listening audience some of the things that your group are doing in terms of voter education and preparing particularly our younger voters or potential voters for these upcoming elections, both state and federal.
Yes, sir. Well, like I said earlier, we are a community-centered organization. We were created around protecting democracy and doing everything that we can to get more people civically engaged, particularly in Black and brown communities across the state of Florida. And so, we do voter education, but we don't just do it from the standpoint of educating people to prepare to vote, right? When people hear voter education, they think about, making sure you know what's on the ballot, making sure you know when to go vote. We view voter education not only as that, but also making sure that you know, what the people who are on your ballot did, whether or not you're going to keep them or move on from them. And we don't typically try to, tell people who to vote for. We just want to make sure that people are as informed as possible to know who was behind some of the decisions or the lack of decisions that they see, right? So when people go to the polls, they need to know it is, the Republican Party currently in Florida that controls both the House and the Senate. And so when you hear about voter suppression laws that you talked about, that is the party in control that is able to pass those type of laws. And so, like you said, 2020 was was the safest and most secure election according to our own governor. And then in the 3 legislative sessions after that, we saw continued attacks on what I believe is our democracy and the way that we administer elections in the state of Florida. In 2021, it was Senate Bill 90. In 2022, it was Senate Bill 524. And this year, it was Senate Bill 7050. And when you take the provisions of all of those different bills, what you are left with is laws, one, that were not needed and that were not necessary, right? In Senate Bill 90, one of the things that they did, and this was the most alarming, is they drastically changed the way we do vote by mail here in the state of Florida. So for those listeners who like to vote by mail, if you did not know, you now need to know that all vote by mail ballot requests were canceled at the start of 2023. And that was because of Senate Bill 90. So now every election cycle, you must reach out to your supervisor of elections and make a new request to be able to vote by mail. When you're making that request, there are also now new ID requirements. So, you now must provide either the last 4 of your social security number or your entire driver's license number, right? They have reduced the amount of time you have prior to an election to make that request. They have reduced the ability for supervisors of elections to set up Dropbox stations. They've also changed the name. It's no longer called the Dropbox. It's called a secure ballot intake station, right? And so when you see these changes happening, despite them saying that without those changes, the elections were already safe and secure, the next thing you have to look to is who is using these methods of voting, right? And one of the things that we know is that in 2018, there were more Republicans in the state of Florida who voted by mail than there were Democrats. That is a fact. And then in 2020, what do we see? Because of COVID, because of the push to stay safe, a lot of Democratic voters chose to vote by mail, and that was the number one way that they chose to cast their ballot. And so then what we see was all of these changes, right? And so, you don't have to be a rocket scientist to connect the dot there, but it's shameful. We should be inviting more people into the democratic process, not making it harder for people to vote. And so you fast forward to, like I said, 2022, you had Senate Bill 524. The big thing that came out of that was the creation of an elections police force, right? And so for black folks who understand the connection of law enforcement and voting, that's not really two things that you want in the same sentence, right?
Right.
And so the governor knew what it was that he was doing when he put that, instance of intimidation and fear there. And he has given this office pretty much unfettered power to go after folks, to investigate folks, to accept anonymous tips, right? And just to really potentially make folks' life, hell, excuse the expression, because they choose to vote and participate in the democratic process. One of the things that this elections police force is able to do is they're able to accept anonymous tips, right? So just think about that. Just think about in the political environment that we're in, right? You have an office that gets a phone call, hey, Genesis so-and-so and so, he did this because they don't like my politics. So now I'm potentially under investigation for something because somebody called in an anonymous tip that could or could not be credible. And most likely it won't be. It's just going to be weaponized to attack political opponents on both sides of the aisle. And so it's not good policy. It doesn't make sense. There's a lot of loopholes in how that office would operate. And yet we're spending millions of dollars to support this program when not one supervisor of election asks for any of this, right? We have 67 counties in the state of Florida. When you look at the 67 supervisors, the overwhelming majority of them share the same political party as the governor and many of the legislators. And yet they're still pushing this on these people, and they haven't even asked for it. This isn't something that they've asked for. And then this year, with Senate Bill 7050, we have seen an attack on voting rights organizations like ours who do the work of democracy. The state is now increasing fines and fees for organizations that may make a mistake. 2 years ago, the most an organization could be fined if they made a mistake concerning voting was $1,000. They've increased that threshold to now $250,000, right? And so that's incredibly punitive. And when you think about the small churches, the small organizations who do voter registration drives and things like that, those people are now trying to reassess and determine whether or not they still want to do that work, because a $250,000 fine could literally end their whole operation. And so it has a chilling effect when people who have done the work and have been out in the vineyard laboring pull away. The League of Women Voters in the state of Florida, one of the oldest, most organized organizations who have done voter registration, they're no longer doing voter registration in the state of Florida. That's shameful. That's a problem, right? When, like I said, we should be doing more to invite people into the process and not exclude them.
Well, let me ask you this. With these tactics that this governor has employed, these tactics of bullyism, do you foresee this becoming the norm beyond the days of DeSantis?
Well,
since it's worked so well for him.
Yes, it's something that I'm certainly concerned about. But I think when folks see that he fizzles out on the national stage, then perhaps they will recognize that that's not a pathway to governing, right? Because yes, the governor had incredible success in his reelection. Yes, he was reelected by 1.5 million votes. But the reality of it is so much of that success that he had on election night in 2022 was attributed to the increase of voter suppression laws. It was attributed to the fact that there was a massive apathy with people just feeling like, their government has forgotten about them. And the turnout was much lower for a gubernatorial election in the state of Florida than we had previously seen. So he likes to tout that number and says, I went from 32,000, which was the first margin when he faced Andrew Gillum, to 1.5 million. But the reality of it is when you have excluded millions of people and pumped, fear into the system, of course that's going to cause people to stay home, which are not your voters, and then in return cause you to have a large lead. So I am slightly concerned that, this may be a pathway forward for some politicians, but I'm also sort of relieved that despite all of these policies on the national stage, at least, he is being rejected soundly. And so hopefully, people see that and say, hey, maybe we need to go in a different direction. Maybe we need to care about the issues that matter to Floridians, like homeowners insurance, and not about what, pronoun someone is being called, right? Maybe we should care about record-breaking affordability and not whether or not someone chooses to go to a nightclub where people dress how they care to dress, right? And so hopefully folks are paying attention and they realize that we need to start focusing on the real issues that matter to folks and their quality of life.
I'm looking at the demographics, and we know that there's going to be significant changes in the population of the U.S. In the next 10, 15 years, and both in terms of the cultural side, the makeup of this country, and the whether or not we're talking about specifically it was a majority, but now we're going to be having to look at coalition politics. How is it that your organization perceives the youth folk, those who are, for example, Maxwell Frost got elected. He was the only Gen Zer, first Gen Zer in the country to get elected from, actually came out of Orlando. So are you perceiving that the young people, his age group, typically 35 and under, will be the ones that will be the driving force, or have you determined that yet?
No, certainly. I think every generation has an opportunity to sort of make their mark. And what we're seeing with young people is that they do care, they are involved, they do have something to say about the matters of the day. And so we're excited to see this engagement, and with information being able to be disseminated and shared so deeply and widely, we think that there's a potential for even greater engagement, right? When we talk about what we're seeing on TikTok and through what formerly was known as Twitter, but now X, it's just remarkable in the ways that, they've been able to mobilize and get the information out there. And so we're very hopeful. Our organization has a great relationship with the Office of Congressman Maxwell Frost, and we're excited to see the way that he's leading and, bringing folks along for the journey there in Orlando. He was somebody who did it the old school way. He went out, knocked on doors, and campaigned, truly grassroots. We hear that term thrown around a lot, but this is a person who upset a lot of well-known names in the political space. You had a former congresswoman. You had a well-known pastor in the Orlando area with the largest AME church in the state. You had a former state senator, right? But when you're organized, when you do it the right way, and you have a message that resonates to the issues that people are dealing with, you never know what can happen. And so we saw that happen in his race, and he's evidence that, young people definitely have something to say.
That's great. That's great. Wow. I mean, and I know that we're moving rapidly in this conversation, man. I knew there would be neither of us would have any difficulty talking about politics because we both have a passion for it. And to see
I can't believe
the kind of work.
Minutes have passed.
Yeah. But as we are getting close towards the end, I want to talk a little bit more about what you see as the future and how our particular listeners can get involved. Like I said, we're roughly about a little over about 14 months out from a national election, and that will also bring people out both at the national, state, and of course the local level as well. So what kinds of things do you see our listening audience can be doing, and what do you recommend that they get involved with in terms of preparing for this upcoming election?
Yes, sir. Well, I know that, you have a very broad audience that is just not within the state of Florida, so I don't want to limit it to specifically the state of Florida. But, the main thing is, educate yourself on the policies and the type of things that are happening that you see that you may agree with or may not agree with. So that's step one. Really familiarize yourself with what you see happening in your community or what you don't see happening, right? Because we know that all things are connected to politics some way or the other, right? Whether or not your trash is picked up, whether or not you have parks or sidewalks in your community, and just overall quality of life. So first step is, educate yourself. The second step is I think we have to continue to engage in the process, right? Wherever that is on your level, right? Engage in the process, whether, many people see voting as an end-all, be-all. We cast our vote, and we go home until the next election. But we got to remember that engagement is more than just voting, right? You have to make sure that you're sending your representative your opinion on certain bills or, ordinances at the local level. So you have to engage in that process. Social media has made it increasingly accessible for us to reach these people. You still have the traditional mediums, the town halls and the meetings and things like that. But, you can hop on social media and let your opinion be known. Share with others. Each one reach one. There was a campaign years ago in Florida that said arrive with 5. And I think we need to adopt that mantra again. Often too many people say, well, I voted. Well, no, we need to take it a step further. You voted, but what about your call log? Look through your call log. Who were the last 10 people that you talked to? Have you had a conversation with them? Who are the people in your church? Have you had a conversation with them at your beauty salon or your hair dresser or your barbershop? We have to really take this as a responsibility that each of us has to get as many people turned out to participate in elections. So I think that's something that we can do no matter where you reside, no matter what state you're in. And on top of that, it's always a good thing to make sure that your voter registration is in compliance and know the latest election laws, because Florida is not on an island when it comes to these voter suppression laws. In fact, Florida sort of sets the tone and leads the way. And so these things that you hear us talking about that are happening in Florida, there's a good chance that your legislature and your governor is trying to bring it to a state if you reside outside of Florida. So, be very aware and conscious of those changes, because we don't want anybody running afoul of the law. And then if you are in Florida, one of the things that I think everybody should be concerned with is this vote by mail re-enrollment that I was talking about. There were 4 million people, 4 million Floridians who were kicked off the vote by mail rolls. And so we have to do the work of getting back to where we were prior to that reset, right? And so we're going to, and that's going to be a sustained effort. Just think about all the years it took just to even get to the 4 million people to be signed up to vote by mail. And so now we have to start that work all over again. Of that 4 million people who were kicked off, there were almost 500,000 black people who were included in that number. So if you care about black votes and black participation in the civic engagement process, maybe you connect with us, connect with Equal Ground, connect with your local church, do a phone bank. You can call in your own local community. We can set it up where you can tell us your precinct. We'll give you a list specifically for your precinct. And you call folks and say, hey, just want to let you know the voting laws have changed. If you want to vote by mail, this is what you need to do. We really pride ourselves in being able to provide all of the resources to make it simple for folks.
But now, how will they get in contact with your organization?
Yes, sir. Thank you. So we're on all social media platforms at Equal Ground. You can also text Equal Ground, one word, to 52886. Again, that's Equal Ground, one word, to 52886. And then once you do that, you'll be connected with us, and we send out regular updates, and we do a call every month. So that's the best way to connect with us.
Wow. Well, let me thank you for taking time out of your very busy schedule. You have educated my audience here tonight substantially. And like we say, we always live by the motto that never go to bed as ignorant as you were, ignorance being the lack of knowledge. Never go to bed as ignorant as you were when you got up this morning. Every day, you ought to learn something new. And I want to thank you for bringing that to pass here tonight on the Judge Hubert Radio Hour. Again, we've been listening to Genesis Robinson, who is the political director with the Equal Ground organization, and we are so grateful for the work that he's doing. With that being said, we're going to bid a fond adieu to each and every one of our listeners out there. Until the next time, when you can join us again here on the Judge Hubert Radio Hour. Our show will be available as a podcast for you to be able to listen to it and to bring your friends out to do the same. So again, thank you for tuning in. Until the next time, God bless you and good night.